Okay, we're just about 5 minutes in, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Welcome today to everyone who's joining us. We had a poll on the screen. We'll maybe share some results from that poll in a few minutes. But you are at the IForum. This is an event, public education event hosted by the Partnership for Strong Communities. I'll get into who we are in a few minutes. My name is Kylie Goslin. I'm the Executive Director of the Partnership for Strong Communities. And as you can see, before I get going, we have some poll results. So 19% of you identified as advocates, 6% as elected officials, another 25% almost as service providers. 5% of you are individuals with lived expertise of housing insecurity or homelessness. Another 13% are community members, and full half of you identified as something other than that. So a good mix of folks here today. Thank you for joining us. We're here today to talk about navigating Connecticut's housing continuum and the experience of seeking stability. We have a great panel of experts here today to share some of their expertise and experience navigating that continuum, and also navigating some of the tools and policy solutions related to that continuum. I'll get into what the continuum is in a moment. But before we get going this morning, I wanted to acknowledge that many of you, including myself, may be coming to this space with heavy hearts, carrying some of the sadness of tragedies that we've experienced in Buffalo and Texas recently, and the scourge of racism and gun violence that continues to plague our country. And so sometimes I know it can be difficult to make space for new work and make space for these conversations amidst that sadness. And so I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge that. And offer a moment of silence for the victims and a pause for us to gather ourselves and center us in the conversation that we're going to be having today. So I hope you all join me in about 10 seconds here of silence. Thank you. And thanks everyone again for setting aside time amidst all of the challenges that we continue to face to talk about another challenge we face, and that's housing insecurity. So as I noted, we're here today to talk about the housing continuum. And this is an IForum. There are free education events, as I noted, that the Partnership for Strong Communities hosts throughout the year. And we want to take a moment too to thank the sponsors that make our work possible and make these IForums possible, specifically the Connecticut Department of Housing and Connecticut Housing Finance Authority for IForums, and our founding sponsor, the Melville Charitable Trust. Next slide. So a few housekeeping notes as we get moving this morning. This event is being recorded and it will be made available following the event on our website. All attendees have entered muted. You can submit all questions that you have through the Q&A box in the Zoom control panel. So we'll hold time for questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to submit those questions, again, using the Q&A throughout the session. Next. So for those of you who are new to the Partnership for Strong Communities, we've been around since 1998. Our mission is that we are dedicated to ensuring that everyone in Connecticut has a safe, stable home in a community, and a safe, stable home, that is affordable to them in an equitable community of their choice. We focus on housing insecurity, affordable housing, homelessness. We provide research and education, and a good part of our work involves bringing together partners, many of you here, through a collective impact format to advance solutions to these challenges. Next slide. We also wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about some of our commitments as an organization, specifically actively supporting a culture of equity and promoting equity-based solutions. We are committed and continue to grow and educate ourselves around racial equity and learning opportunities and sharing that with our partners. We're also committed to identifying solutions to address the systemic policies which reinforce disparities that we all know, many of us joining today know, that persist, particularly in our housing space. And we also are committed to respecting and listening to different viewpoints, opinions, thoughts, and ideas, and embracing a culture of inclusion. And finally, We're committed to approaching our work and analyzing data and metrics and our goals through an equity lens. Next. So I wanted to take a moment to talk a little bit about the partnership's work. Many of you are aware that in the recent months, the partnership has announced that we're going to be sharpening our focus on housing insecurity and affordable housing as a solution to homelessness. And you can find more about this shift in our work and our capacity on our website. If you go to pschousing.org, there's a public statement that talks about this. And so we wanted to introduce today the concept of the housing stability continuum. And this is something that we're going to be continuing to refine and also putting out more research and materials around. But we wanted to create a frame of reference for understanding the experience of housing insecurity, and then some of the tools, both financing tools and policy tools that we have in place, or that maybe we should put in place in order to help alleviate these challenges. So there's 6 categories that we've identified on the continuum, and you'll hear our experts today talking about those various spaces. The first, many of you are familiar with if you've been involved in our homelessness work, and that's unsheltered and emergency shelter. So these are folks in unsheltered homelessness who may be living in a place not fit for human habitation, like a car or a park. Maybe they're connected with an outreach worker or not. The second category is emergency shelter. So this is someone who's staying in a short-term temporary crisis housing for individuals or households experiencing homelessness. This could be a homeless shelter or a domestic violence shelter. And you'll see at the bottom of these categories, we have some estimates around numbers, and that's something we're going to be working to refine in our new phase of work. The next 2 categories are those who are temporarily housed. So when we talk about temporary housing, we're really talking about housing that is likely time limited or definitely time limited. So temporarily housed and less stable, maybe folks who are living in emergency accommodations like a doubled up or overcrowded situation. Maybe they're couch surfing, living with friends or family. Maybe someone staying in a hotel or motel temporarily. And then temporarily housed but more stable, maybe someone who has a short-term housing subsidy. Maybe they're in a halfway house or sober house, or respite housing if they've recently exited our criminal justice system. So again, these are places which aren't necessarily permanent housing, which someone has a roof over their head, but it's a necessarily time-limited circumstance. We don't have good estimates on the number of individuals in those spaces, although again, we'll be working on that. And then finally, folks who are permanently housed. And again, we've bucketed them out into 2 separate places. So folks who are experiencing a permanent housing solution that may be unstable. So these are households that are spending more than 30% of their income on rent or housing costs, and maybe also folks who have a lease or have a permanent housing solution, but it's an unsafe environment. Maybe it's not healthy housing, it's not quality housing. And then finally, we have those who are permanently housed in a stable environment where they're spending 30% or less of their income on housing costs. This could include someone who's using a voucher or in a subsidized rental that's affordable to them, as well as folks who are in the private market with an affordable rental or home ownership option. So we wanted to lay those out for you today as a way of, again, just trying to frame the conversation. More work will come from the partnership in clarifying these spaces, and we look forward to your feedback also on this as we continue to refine it. So our goal today is to really share what these experiences look like and how that experience is for individuals living across the housing stability continuum, as well as to talk about some of the solutions and how those solutions work or maybe don't work, and how we can continue to try to advance better solutions throughout our work here and all of your work in this space. Next slide. We want to note too that throughout this session, we're encouraging all of you to share your thoughts. As we noted, there's a Q&A button where you're welcome to submit questions and answers, and we'll address those at the end. And also, if you would like to share your own experience, you can select to send anonymously and share your stories that way, or your personal experiences. Again, you can make them public or not public. This is a conversation about lived experiences, and so we are interested in hearing those. And if you are comfortable sharing that, we would love to have folks share their experiences. Next slide. So next I'm going to get into introducing our moderator. Our moderator is Jamil Ragland, who's no stranger to the partnership. He's been a writer with our team before, and he is a writer more broadly and has been published in many different locations, which I'll talk about in a moment. Jamil comes from the Hartford area, is Trinity educated, and again has published pieces really around the housing space, around race and culture and other issues. He recently published a piece through our Research Associates program. The partnership has a Research Associates program that's aimed at lifting up young voices, particularly voices of color, and publishing their work, particularly around the topics of housing. And you can find Jamil's most recent piece entitled Roadblock to the Middle Class, Housing Insecurity in Connecticut, which was also published in the Mirror recently. Jamil's been a featured writer before in the Mirror, as well as Connecticut News Junkie, WNPR, New England Public Media, and many other venues. So you can find his work all over the place. And if you take the time to read his recent piece with the that he published with us, I think you'll see why. Jamil is also the winner of the United Way of Connecticut's Community Rockstar Award. Again, hopefully he'll bring some of his rockstar capabilities to his moderating experience today. And Jamil is currently a staff writer at Planned Parenthood of Southern New England. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jamil to introduce our panelists and moderate our conversation today. Thanks, Jamil.
Thank you so much, Kylie. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation about the challenges that Connecticut residents face when it comes to finding stable housing. As Kylie said, my name is Jamil Ragland, and I'll be moderating this panel discussion today. We have an esteemed panel of experts who are going to share their experiences with us this morning, and I hope that we get a better understanding of their experience, but also how their experience speaks to what so many other people are experiencing in Connecticut, that we just don't see what lies right beneath the surface of the people that we see every day and that we encounter and what they might be experiencing as well. And I want to start with first having each panelist introduce themselves and just talk a little bit about their hopes and dreams, because sometimes we forget in this conversation that these are people. People need housing and individuals need housing. And in order to achieve those goals, people need stable housing to get to where they want to be at. So we're going to start and go ahead with, begin with Ms. Wilson, please.
Hi, I'm India. I'm a caterer and a bartender. I'm the mother of 2 children. I would like to see my business grow and basically thrive in the community. My dreams are to leave. Well, basically, I would like to leave something for my children and to set them up for generational wealth.
Thank you so much, Ms. Wilson. Next, we move to Ms. Beltry, please.
Hello, and thank you for having me here. My name is Caroline Beltry. I am a mother of a 12-year-old. I am also a lead family development specialist and a case manager for homeless and runaway youth. My dream would be to remove barriers so that people don't have to go through what I went through in trying to obtain housing, and work together to end homelessness, which is very possible.
Thank you very much, Ms. Beltry. And last but not least, Mr. Kristofalski.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Joe Kristofalski. I am a father of 2 grown children, the proud grandfather of 4 children. I'm also the senior member of the Faces of Homelessness Speakers Bureau through Hands on Hartford. And my dream would be to not have barriers put in the way of people just because they are homeless, and break down the stigma. And I would love to see everyone have a living wage and affordable housing across the board.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you so much, all 3 of you, for joining us this morning. We have a lot to discuss, so I'm going to go ahead and jump right in, because housing stability is a really complicated subject, because it encompasses both finding housing and then maintaining that housing later. And I'm going to start with Ms. Wilson, because she's been having an experience that has been happening across Connecticut right now with this wave of, quote, no-fault evictions that's sweeping across the state. So Ms. Wilson, can you tell us a little bit about your experience with your landlord and how you found yourself in a no-fault eviction situation and how that's impacting your current housing search?
Okay, sure. Well, the incident that I'm going through now was, I think it started well, I've been in my current situation and my current housing for 5 years now. I've always been the perfect tenant. I've never been evicted, always paid on time. I've actually always had a balance, overdue balance, because I always paid a little extra. And in September, when Hartford went through I think it was a hurricane where everything was flooding, my basement flooded, it kept flooding. But prior to that, I always dealt with flooding in my basement. I will always complain. But after the flooding, I flooded my basement, everything. I kind of lost everything in my basement. But after this particular
Sorry, not sure what happened there.
I think we lost her, Jamel.
Okay.
Hopefully she'll jump back on.
Yep. Sorry about that, everybody. We'll come back to her if she comes back on, but I'll move forward to Joe. And Joe, if you could you had a really harrowing experience through housing instability, which is also kind of no fault of your own, and began with a work accident, which is how a lot of these stories start. Can you talk a little bit about what happened with you?
Sure. I was a warehouse manager working for a business in East Hartford. And in 2010, I injured myself getting off a forklift. And long story short, because I couldn't perform my warehouse duties in December of that year, on my 50th birthday, I was given a termination notice. Later on, I found out that I was singled out, but that's another story. So previous to that, I had helped pay for my son's education to go to Lincoln Tech, so I had no money in the bank. So when I lost my job, I had no money in the bank. And I went to unemployment. I went to file unemployment, and they told me, well, you got hurt on the job, so it's a workman's comp issue. So I went and filed workman's comp. Both workman's comp and unemployment kept telling me to file with the other ones because they were going to pay me. So I had no income coming in. And in January of 2011, I called 211 and said, here's my situation. I said, I lost my job. I got hurt on the job. I'm trying to file for unemployment. I'm filing claims, but they tell me they can't pay me because I got hurt on the job. Workman's comp is telling me because I got terminated that I should be paid from unemployment. So I had no income coming in. And I said, I don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. And 211 said to me, well, all the programs we have that can help you are all income contingent. And with you not having any income coming in, there's no program that we can direct you to help you in this situation. So my landlady at the time was willing to work with me, and she said, I'm sure something will break. So from the period of January of 2011 through May of 2011, I kept calling 211, kept going to unemployment, kept going to workman's comp, and not getting any payment from either agency. So I sort of fell through the cracks, and I kind of found it unbelievable, but I figured there was something that was going to happen. So I wound up selling my car. I got evicted from where I was living because my landlady at the time owned rentals with her children, and they wanted her to basically throw me out. It was amicable, but I wound up living in a motel room on the Berlin Turnpike for 6 weeks because of that. And I kept going to unemployment, kept going to workman's comp, and I was getting nowhere and no income coming in. And living in the motel on the Berlin Turnpike was an interesting experience. At that time, you could only stay there for 2 weeks, and then you had to leave for a day. So I really didn't have any stable housing because you have to leave for a day, because once you're there 2 weeks, you establish residency. And a lot of times people would stay beyond the 2 weeks and not pay at the motel. So that's why the motel owner had to have me leave for a day. So I wound up couch surfing on my son's couch a couple of times during those 6 weeks. But it was a kind of frustrating experience. I was going to all these places and calling 211 back and seeing if anything was on the horizon. And they told me that, do you have an income coming in? I'm like, no. They gave me numbers to, places that didn't even exist anymore. But I kept going to Hartford, kept going to workman's comp, kept looking for work, even though I had a bad knee and I was limping around. I couldn't get hired. I was going to therapy. And I just found it an unbelievable situation. But around the 5th week of that, I finally wound up calling Senator Richard Blumenthal's office and said, look, I'm miffed at what's going on here. I can't find housing for myself. I've been evicted, which is already an obstacle. I have no income coming in because no one wants to pay me, and I'm looking for work. I'm not looking for a handout, but is there anything I'm missing, I'm not doing right here? You know, I'm college educated and I can't believe that I'm going through this experience. And it was through their intervention that they got me into the rapid rehousing and recovery program, which I didn't know anything about, nor did 211 at the time. 211 has gotten better as a coordinated care access, but at that time it was, you know, sort of in shambles. And the whole point of my story is, even though I was unstable for 6 weeks, I had to get a United States Senator's office to intervene on my behalf to help me find housing. And I just sort of found that kind of crazy, because I thought to myself, wow, if it's hard for me, an educated person, and I can make contacts and call and everything, how hard it must be for everyone else living on the street. So after that phone call, within a couple of weeks, I got an attorney and I finally got a workman's comp check. But it was sort of a eye-opening and humbling experience, but that's why I do advocacy work for homeless people now.
Thank you so much, Joe. And that experience really speaks to kind of the way that, as you described it, people fall between the cracks of these programs and these overlapping systems that don't seem to have the answer for when something actually happens to somebody. Because as you described, you didn't have an income problem, you had a workman's comp problem, you didn't have a housing problem until it became a housing problem. That was an unemployment problem, and how all those things interlock together and just become kind of like this snowball effect that's pushing you downhill. And it takes a really Herculean effort to really turn that around. Thank you so much for sharing that experience. We have Miss Wilson back with us, so I'm going to bring her back in to finish her story. I believe, Miss Wilson, you had just spoken about how you had constant flooding in your basement, and the hurricane that Connecticut had last September really became a turning point for you and your experience with your landlord.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yes, within that hurricane, after the flooding, I began to experience a lot of mold within my house. And I live in a single family. I live in a single family home that I've been renting with my 2 children. And the mold began to, I first started seeing it. I complained about it because it took them about a week to even come and to get the water out. So me and my family, we did it ourselves. Like, we did as much as we could, but it started soaking up through the walls. So that became a problem on its own, getting them to even do the simple maintenance thing. So we got the water up as best we could, but it started seeping through the walls. So within a week, we noticed, like, the smell itself, we can tell, you know, things, it wasn't right. But then I noticed the mold going all the way up the walls. It started to turn black. Like, me and both my children, we have asthma. So it became a health risk all in itself. So with me complaining, I ended up moving out of my house for like a week. I stayed with family, or we got a hotel room for a few days. And within me complaining, I ended up telling them, you know, I'm going to call the health department. I'm calling the fire department. So they didn't like that. So that within that same conversation, they called me back. Well, you know, we're gonna, well, you know what, we're not renewing your lease. You have to go. And I'm like, well, how can't, what did I do? Well, you didn't do anything, but you have to go. You have 30 days. And I'm said, well, my lease isn't up until March. So why do I have to go? Well, how do I have 30 days? It's September. So they basically tried to force me out then, but I knew that my lease wasn't up then. So they had to. So they tried to basically kick me out then. And within that, it was just a downhill process from then on into even now, because now I'm looking, so I have maybe 30 days to get out now. And even they're coming up with the craziest things to try to get me out. And even with security deposit, they told me to even with repairs, I just had a clogged toilet. It is my first time in the 5 years that I've been here. I had a clogged toilet. The person came and they unclogged my toilet. They had to use a snake. I just received a bill yesterday for $400. And I called them. I'm like, how did I get a $400 bill for a clogged toilet? And their response was, well, it was clogged with toilet paper. And I'm like, how? that's what goes in the toilet. How am I being? So now they're coming up, like they're coming with bogus charges. And it's like, I am a single parent that's, and I'm a small business owner. Like I'm not getting in here. I do catering, and it's like, I'm just, especially with COVID just being done, like I wasn't working, and it's just ridiculous. A lot of the bogus things that I'm going through right now.
You mentioned before too that they have tried to institute some charges around you actually even moving out of the property, even though they're the ones who have forced you to move. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yes, they also sent me for the moving, they gave me a moving out package. And they told me like when I move out that I had to make sure everything was clean. They told me they wanted me to paint the walls, make sure like mind you, and I've been here 5 years, that the carpets need to be, that I should hire a cleaning company. They wanted everything to be basically brand move-in ready for the next tenant. And I feel like that's very like unrealistic if I've lived here for 5 years. I mean, of course it needs to be cleaned out, all my furniture gone, but they want the house moved in ready or they're not going to give me my security deposit back, which is over $3,000. So I just feel like that's very unrealistic. It's not fair. And you're already kicking me out for nothing. So it's just, they're coming out of the woodworks for everything right now when it's already, and then even during the pandemic, I had to wait almost a year to get even a refrigerator because they kept saying we're ordering parts. It was just so much stuff that I had to keep complaining about. And I have a voucher right now. Even when I reached out to Section 8 to help me, it's like, well, you can go to legal aid, because I reached out to them like, hey, they're charging me, they're kicking me out, and what can I do? And they're like, well, there's nothing you can really do, there's nothing we can do. You can go to legal aid. Anytime I've asked for help is go to legal aid, and what are they going to do for me either? So I don't feel like I really have any options.
So it becomes a situation where it compounds itself, where a somewhat absentee landlord is now demanding that you move out because you ask for the services you pay for through your rent. And you run into the same problem that Joe is having, where these various services that are supposed to help just throw their hands up and say, well, we actually can't do anything until you're out on the street, until you're in that situation. And, it was difficult enough for Joe to be on his own in that sort of situation. But that's the thing you're looking specifically to avoid as a woman with 2 children. You don't want to be there and then have to say, now I'm homeless. Now can you help me? You're looking to prevent that situation, but there doesn't seem to be much help for you right now.
No, and then it's impossible to find somewhere to move right now also. So that's been a struggle all on its own.
How has that been? Like, what have you found in terms of the houses themselves and neighborhoods they're in? What's been the difficulty there for you?
The difficulty with that is looking to find somewhere, well, the neighborhoods, that's been kind of hard. Because I'm looking for a 3-bedroom, trying to find somewhere. When you do, you need a credit score of 700 or up for a rental. Then you need 2 months security, 2 months rent, 2 months, it's 2 months rent, a security deposit. So that's 3 times the rent right there. They require you to make 3 times the amount of rent with it for your income. So that's stopping people right there. So it's like you're requiring so much just to be able to move in, and they require so much up front as well. So that's already a hardship. Then on top of that, for me personally, I have to stay in a certain region. My children goes to they're in a choice program. So my kids have been in a choice program since they've been in kindergarten. So I only can stay in the greater Hartford area. So that limits me to where my children can go. So that makes it hard all in itself as well. So that's been kind of restrictive for me, because I want my daughter's a straight A student, 3.9 GPA. She has multiple scholarships. I want her to stay in her school system. She's graduating next year to go to high school. So, to go to college. I want her to stay in her school. My son, I don't want the district to change. So it's hard right now.
Yeah, and those charges on top of your current landlord trying to keep your security deposit just compounds the financial aspect of that even worse on top of everything else.
Exactly, because the $3,000, that could have been a security deposit. That could be the 2 months rent plus but they're coming up with bogus charges to keep the security deposit now for when I move, when they're forcing me to move. So.
Thank you for sharing that experience.
You're welcome.
And Caroline, your story starts outside of Connecticut and begins with a difficult situation that you were in there. Can you talk about what happened with you and what brought you to where you are now?
Absolutely. First and foremost, thank you for providing the platform for me to be able to speak on this, because it has been impacting. My story started in Massachusetts, which is where I lived. That's where I was born and raised. And a lot of factors contributed to my becoming homeless and my homeless instability, in that I had grief and loss. I had lost my mother, and then 17 days later, I took my brother off life support on her birthday. I had domestic violence, I had drug addiction, I had an eviction related to domestic violence. So at the time I chose to leave my domestic violence relationship, was already homeless and living in my car for a year prior to getting to Connecticut. Once I came to Connecticut, I entered a domestic violence shelter. I was there for a little bit, and due to circumstances out of my control, I was behind on child support and had to go back to court to answer 2 contempt charges. And while I did have a letter from the shelter stating that I was staying there, I was seeking services, looking for a job. I was put in a women's correctional facility over the child support, and lost my place at the shelter. I returned within 2 weeks and started to work right away, because I had already started the process of looking for work, and was able to obtain employment, and working with that same domestic violence agency, obtained temporary housing through their transitional living program. And I was there for a little over 2 years. And in that time, I was working on myself, having gone through so much trauma. I was in no place to just jump into the old work that I used to do, which was accounting. So I had to start slow, start from the bottom. And I was working at Dunkin' Donuts, worked through different positions there, became a manager, but it was still not enough to afford my own housing. And again, working through the transitional living house and the domestic violence agency, they found another program, or at least so we thought, that could help me in Cromwell. And that was a horrific year, because I knew once I went into that program, it wasn't good. It wasn't right. Something wasn't on the up and up. And unfortunately, the agency didn't know either. And the person running what was called the transitional living house was actually a fraud. And he was defrauding Medicaid by billing for services that were never rendered. And his homes were not actually transitional living homes on the up and up. So that was a year of chaos. And I found myself again, after working so hard to get myself to where I was facing yet again homelessness. And by this time, I at least had a car. When I went into the transitional living house, I had lost everything. No car, my entire storage was gone. I had nothing. So at least this time I had a car, and I said, you know what? I've lived in a car before. If I have to do it again, I will, but it's not fair. Why should I live in my car? I've made so much, I've made so many strides. Working with the domestic violence agency again, that helped me. They found an apartment for me that was subsidized through the Center Congregational Church in Meriden. And I was there for a little over a year. Luckily, I obtained housing, but in the midst of all that, prior to leaving the transitional, leaving the transitional program, I did obtain housing from one of the housing authorities in Connecticut. But the barrier I faced is that when I went in for the formal interview, filling out the complete application, they asked on the application, have you ever, or are you currently a medical marijuana patient? And when I said yes, I answered honestly, because the truth will set you free, right? I received a letter not long after saying, I'm sorry, based on your answer, you do not qualify for housing. And I remember asking my advocate, and saying, if I do the right thing, I should be okay. But I did the right thing, and now I'm yet again without housing, because basically what I'm being told is, if you are a medical marijuana patient, you don't have the right to housing. And that was so painful and disheartening. And I was angry. I was angry because I didn't understand how that could be a barrier. And so it just pushed me to advocate more for people who are homeless and people who are facing barriers, because my barrier is, I am a Black, Indigenous person of color. I am a female. I am a medical marijuana patient, and I am a domestic violence victim. And from that perspective, credit, as India mentioned, is crucial, because when I was looking for an apartment, I was asked for my credit score to be above 700. I was asked for my income to be 39 times the monthly rent, meaning if my rent was $1,000, I needed to make $39,000. If I did not have good credit, I needed a cosigner whose income had to be 49 times my monthly rent, who had to be a homeowner with awesome credit. And in a time where COVID has hit, no one has the luxury of being a cosigner, and many, if not all, were impacted by COVID. So I was again facing being homeless. And had it not for a housing authority in Connecticut that actually came through, my number came up, I would not be stably housed today. But I went through every single range from homelessness to housing stability that both Joe and India have gone through, whether it was because I didn't have the income, it wasn't enough, my credit score wasn't good. And speaking about that, when people ask, why don't you leave a domestic violence relationship? If someone has children, they have a lot to consider, because it's not like everything. Yes, the most important thing is safety. And if someone's in it, they need to get out no matter what. But there are barriers they're going to face. If there's credit involved and your credit is gone because of this domestic violence relationship, that's a barrier. That's a big barrier. I can't stop and think of, I need to make sure my bills are paid. I need to make sure my credit score is at 700 before I leave, because chances are something will happen and I won't be able to leave because I'll be dead. And that's reality. And what I tell people, Jamil, and everyone on this forum is, people want to hear the truth, but the difference is sometimes you just can't handle the truth. You can't handle my truth, because my truth and your truth look different and come from different perspectives. But I'm speaking to everybody as someone who has gone through hell and back. It should not have taken me 6 years to obtain permanent housing. And the barriers need to be removed, and the regulations and policies need to be changed. Thank you.
No, you bring up a really excellent point about the truth, and this is one reason why we wanted to have this forum in particular, to hear the expertise of people who have to live that truth, because so often these conversations are centered around policy and big numbers, like X number of people are unhoused or Y number of dollars going to this program. But the reality is that people are experiencing all of these things in their everyday lived lives. And you mentioned specifically how domestic violence and credit intersect. And can you talk just a little bit more about that? Because that was something that was surprising to me, and I appreciated hearing that from you when we spoke earlier. So can you talk a little bit more about that, and just kind of like how things that people don't anticipate become barriers to housing, even like you said, 6 years down the line, things that happened so long ago?
Yes, absolutely. Well, when I got involved in my domestic violence relationship, and obviously you don't know that it's going to turn into one, I had great credit. I was doing great. I was a billing manager making $72,000 a year. had a nice truck, had an apartment in Massachusetts. I was good. But then the domestic violence occurred and the person is controlling your money. You need to give account of everything you do, or they're taking the money for drugs. And once I was hooked on drugs, that's where a lot of the money went. I went through money in my hands that when you're not in your right mind, mental health was a huge aspect of my darkness. So when I left, there was an eviction there already, which hinders me being able to find a place. Luckily, because I spoke to the credit agencies and explained that this was related to domestic violence, they were able to remove that so that I was able to get my housing. But then as far as credit is concerned, it takes time because I was in a place where I was not making $72,000 a year when I came to Meriden. So to break it down, I went from making $34 an hour to $10.10 an hour. And someone could say, well, you could have gotten yourself a better job, a better paying job. I needed to start from zero. I had fallen from here to here. I needed to start from zero and climb back up. And that needed to happen slowly because I needed to work on my mental health. I need to work on my emotional health. So not having the income coming in that I had, trying to pay down that credit was extremely difficult. Trying to remove a repossession from your credit report is difficult because I couldn't pay it. I didn't have the source, the means. So that impact on a person is going to impact them being able to get an apartment. And I believe to an extent it's a barrier because if someone's gone through domestic violence, there should be some policy, some regulation, something that gives that person some kind of a break, that a consideration, something. Because then you're saying, then you shouldn't leave. Your credit needs to be okay. You need to make sure that all your T's are crossed and I's are dotted. And when you're in a domestic violence relationship, it's your life, it's your children's lives that you need to save. You can worry about that later.
No, absolutely. And one of the things that your story highlights, that all your stories highlight, is how external circumstances really forced your housing instability, that it wasn't because housing and homelessness is always kind of morally coded, that there must be some kind of personal failing that you have, you're making poor decisions, you're not working as hard as you should, you're not managing your money as well as you should, that there's some sort of personal failing that always contributes to the housing instability. But as we hear in all these stories, there was nothing like that. All of you were successful, working hard, people who were working hard until an external circumstance really came along and completely turned the housing situation upside down for you. In particular for you, Joe, describing that bureaucratic no man's land that you were trapped in until you called your state senator. What was that? What did that really feel like as you're trying to navigate this system and people keep sending you in two different directions, giving you different answers every time you ask a question?
It was, I was in disbelief. I know that we had talked previous, for me, being like you said, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I got hurt and I lost my job. I never thought they would create this domino effect, but for me to have to get a United States senator's intervention to help me get housing, I thought was just totally crazy, because you should be able to do these things on your own. There shouldn't be these many barriers. Information should be updated, and instead of people, when you make a phone call to 211, like I said, this was 10 years ago when it happened, but still, when you make a phone call, that's the helpline, and they're good now. But back then, the information wasn't correct, and there was no coordinated care access. And sort of like listening to our other two panelists, India and Caroline, I was asked this question at an event I was at a couple weeks ago, and it really got me to thinking. I was discriminated against too, looking for housing, because I was an educated white male. So the way I look at it now, I was probably put on the side because it didn't look like a dire situation to someone that, because I was an educated white male, I would probably figure this out on my own. And now I think of the things that I went through, I probably was discriminated against because of who I was also. And it just dawned on me, I probably, all this that was going on at the time, I couldn't believe that I had been unemployed once before, previous in the early 2000s, and I got a check within a couple of weeks. And I couldn't believe that I'm unemployed and I got hurt on the job, and back and forth and back and forth. And eventually you have to get an attorney to help you navigate workman's comp. And when did getting hurt on the job and needing an income to help you survive become a for-profit industry? Just like later on, I had to go on Social Security disability, but you can't navigate that system without hiring an attorney too. And that's a for-profit industry. They get, you get your money retro to when you get hurt, but the attorney gets $6,000 or 20% of whatever your settlement is. So when did becoming hurt on the job, doing the right thing, become a for-profit industry? It opened up like a whole barrel of worms that I looked into this thing, thinking to myself, how did this happen to me? And if it's so hard for me, how hard it must be for the people out on the street. It was just a mind-blowing and frustrating situation, but I never lost hope because I always figured there's got to be an end to the means here, and I will find a solution. I just never realized it would be that hard navigating through the system.
No, and just like with Miss Wilson's situation with the landlord keeping the security deposit, the money situation compounds as you need to hire somebody in order to help you get the money that you are waiting for to come to you. And it just becomes, more and more money out of your pocket that becomes even more difficult to help you get back into your housing that you need to be in. Ms. Wilson, for you, kind of the opposite side, where Joe had to go through all these different hoops and hurdles and stuff. You just simply had no one to help you in this no fault eviction. What does that experience like for you? How did that make you feel?
Just helpless a little bit, because it's like, I just feel like, what am I supposed to do? I feel like I've done everything right. I went to different places. I've asked different people, like, what am I supposed to do? I can't not pay. I mean, they've already had the money. I can't not move. I don't want to risk getting evicted. I don't want to go to court. I don't want to draw out a whole different process. I mean, like I said, I haven't done anything wrong. I sent Section 8 all the pictures of the mold that was going up the walls. I have all the emails of when I first was asking them in advance to fix the basement because it was flooding before, way before all of Hartford flooded, from like last year when the basement flooded the few first times. When I have like pictures of it, like it's coming, like it was like a river down there coming down the wall and down the walls, down the doors, down the steps. I just feel like, what else can I do? I mean, I didn't do anything wrong, so it's just like, and I mean, Rego, they're well known, and so it's not like it's just some little corporation that's from New York that no one knows. Rego Realty, everyone knows them, so it's like, what can I do? I'm just one person. So even with proof, like even with, well, not even proof, because it's not like a proof, like a thing like that. Like I have pictures. I signed a mold thing when I moved into here, so. Like I said, it's something for my health, for everyone's health. I shouldn't have to live with molds. So, and then for me bringing that point up, hey, I'm with mold. And then I'm saying, okay, well, we have to stay in a hotel. Can you at least provide us money for the hotel? Or if I have to keep staying in a hotel, I'm not going to pay rent this month. Now I have to get out because I'm telling you guys to fix the mold in the basement. And it's just, I don't know. It's just funky. It's just not fair.
And even with the situations, the programs that are supposed to help in those situations, like you said, you mentioned Section 8 and how that hasn't been as helpful for you. And kind of like, I know, Caroline, you had a similar situation with Section 8 as well, where you received a voucher, but you weren't able to actually utilize it. Can you speak a little bit about that, please?
Yes, absolutely. So last year in around March or April, I applied for housing at New Haven Housing through Elm City Communities. And I was shocked when, I want to say 4 months later, I received a notice stating your number has come up and it's time to start the whole process. So I was excited because usually you're on a wait list for years. So I'm like, okay, great. This is wonderful. I have a Section 8 voucher. It's New Haven. I'm excited. But then the process was horrific. And that's where I ran into the barriers with the property management companies, the realty companies, and the landlords requiring so much of the tenant. As India mentioned, they want first security deposit, 2 months rent, perfect credit, a co-signer if possible. And in these times, that's almost unrealistic. And I understand that they're taking that approach because they were burned during the pandemic and the moratorium and all that, but then that means that there's a lot of people who aren't going to qualify. So we're going to have a lot of people who are homeless. We're going to have a lot of shelters that are overfilled and people outside or in compromising situations, living in a car in a place not meant for human habitation. And I had to give up that voucher because I couldn't do it. Or the price of the rent was so exorbitant that I couldn't afford it on what I was making. Or I would have to be forced to get a second job. And having chronic health conditions, taking on a second job is tough. It's extremely difficult because after working my full-time job, I'm barely able to make it. So taking on another job would then put me at risk of burnout, would put me at risk of having more health issues, and would put me at risk of not being at my top performance for my current full-time job. So I couldn't risk all that, and I had to let the voucher go. And I let the voucher go prior to even knowing if I was going to have housing. I did not know what I was going to do. At that time, my plan was, I'm going to live in my car and do what I did before. Get a membership at a gym so I can take a shower every day and live in my car until I'm able to afford something. But the painful part for me was, this is 6 years later. Why am I still in the same place 6 years later? So there's a lot of variables. It's having a voucher, not being able to use it, not having good credit, having the barrier if you're a medical marijuana patient, if you're a domestic violence victim, and in the case of India and Joe, they had circumstances that had nothing to do with anything, like nothing. There should be no reason why any of us went through what we went through and have it last the way it has lasted.
Yeah, and so even when these programs, supposedly provide the help they're supposed to provide, they still aren't actually covering the gap for so many people in so many situations. And this is the type of thing that people need to realize, that it's not just you put a Section 8 voucher in someone's hand and it magically solves all their problems, or that you put someone into a supportive housing situation and it solves all their problems. That these things are all knotted together, and it takes multiple angles to untie that knot and to really help someone to move forward. For you, Joe, did you ever apply for a voucher, or did you ever receive one? What was the process like for you?
I did apply for Section 8. I was advised to, but I was put on a waiting list. It was in the town of Wyndham and Willimantic were the two towns that had openings, which wasn't where I was looking to go. But after I got housed, they gave me a case manager, and the Rapid Rehousing Recovery Program, they paid my first month's and last month's rent, my security deposit, and they kept the case manager with me, even though I had income coming in, while I was going through the process of trying to apply for Social Security disability, because this was the other thing. After the attorney researched, and he said they did single you out when they fired you and let you go, but they also let go of 2 other managers on the East Coast to make it look like they didn't single me out. And I was faced with, we can go after this company, which is a multi-billion-dollar company, and they will drag it out in the courts for years and you will never see resolution, or you go for Social Security disability, which I wound up doing. I had an apartment that they got me in Forestville, the Rapid Rehousing Recovery, but once I had the money coming and the income coming in, I wasn't able to work because I was still going through issues with my knee, and I got the Social Security disability. But as we had talked, I am not on Social Security disability anymore. I work part-time at Stop and Shop only because I get better benefits working part-time at Stop and Shop. I get dental, medical, and it's all paid for through the union, and my insurance costs are very cheap. Whereas on Social Security disability, all you have is Medicare Part A and B. You get no eyeglass coverage, you have no dental, you have no prescription. Those are all riders. So if you're getting $1,400 a month, and then you have to pay for those other things on top of that, it's very hard to find affordable housing. That's why currently I have stable housing. I live with my daughter and her family, but this is not how I envision myself at almost 62 years old being. I don't want to be a burden to anyone. And I know they don't look at it that way, but I still feel like I am. But if it wasn't for her taking me in on what I make working part-time, the benefits help me because of my medical condition, but there's no way I can find affordable housing and make it out there. So it's been, it's a struggle for me. I eventually would like to be on my own, but I only have a certain amount of hours I can work every day before my knee starts bothering me. And it's usually about 6. So realistically, I can't work a full-time job unless it's a sit-down job. And at my age, it's very hard to find employment. So I'm sort of happy in the situation I am, but I would like it to get better.
And that's actually the perfect segue to what I want to ask each one of you. Like, what types of policies or laws would you like to see changed to make things better? Because there's, the constituency here who's listening to your stories right now who can maybe go out and make changes themselves or lean on their elected officials and others to make those types of changes. So what kind of ideas do you have? One thing you would like to see changed that would make a difference in your life and therefore in other people's lives too, Joe?
I would definitely like it to see it be easy for someone that gets hurt on the job to be able to bring their medical evidence to workman's comp and say, here it is, you sign a paper and you start receiving a check. You shouldn't have to file paperwork and have to get an attorney to help you navigate through that process. The same with Social Security. I would like to see it be easier for people. You lose your job, your unemployment comes. You shouldn't have to go through the hassle that I went through and have to have someone help you navigate these things. I want to see it broken down and be easier so that common folk like me can just sign their name and here's the evidence and here it is. It shouldn't be a waiting process of trying to get payment which is due you.
Just a simplification, just make this so that regular people can do this without having to spend years and potentially thousands of dollars to get the thing that they're owed. Absolutely. For you, Ms. Beltry, what would you like to see change at the policy level or law?
For me, it would be the policies surrounding housing for domestic violence victims. I think they come to agencies and to shelters with so much on their shoulders, and to have to worry about my credit's not perfect. I have an eviction. Have something in place so that those things are taken into account and not used against someone to further victimize them. And from the medical marijuana perspective, we are living in a state that has legalized marijuana. I'm a patient with a card and with noted and a history of medical condition. There needs to be some kind of workaround for that, because I think that the stigma needs to be addressed and removed so that people who are patients don't face barriers in finding housing and employment. Because I have yet to have anyone tell me that my being a patient has hindered me in any way. It has not stopped me from progressing in the past 5 years that I've been here. It hasn't stopped me from being promoted and moving up in my career and in integrating myself into my community to help other people. That doesn't hinder me. That's simply a form of which I use to treat my chronic conditions. That's it.
Absolutely. And you made the point perfectly that there seems to be any number of people who are ready to cash in on marijuana and ready to, turn into a business where they can extract value from people, where they can tax it and stuff like that, but they don't want to deal with the other issues that are holding people back. So that needs to be addressed as well as we move forward on marijuana legalization. And for you, Ms. Wilson, anything that you like to see change, like laws or policy wise, to make things easier for someone like yourself?
Well, I like to say that I do, well, I agree with Joe, because like with disability and things like that, that's actually what started me and what made me go and be a business owner on my own. And because I had a back injury, and it was just so much going on with doing the medical leave and FM. It was just so much. It made me just leave my job and just do, it was just too much. So that's what made me actually become a business owner. So I definitely agree with that aspect. But what I would like to see change is just basically help for the small guy. Just for just normal people like me with the big corporations, and people to be held accountable, that they just can't do what they want, or for even to something as simple as the laws that's already in place. Like if there's lead and things like that, and the laws that's already in place, you can't just do what you want. Like, you can't just kick people out for no reason. You can't just hike up rent because, you got your own things going on. That's not fair to people like me or just anyone. It should be things protecting the small guys. That's all. That's what I'd say.
Right, because all these individual small people make up the population of our state. Everyone needs a place to live. Everyone needs safe, affordable housing. And all these different situations require people feel fragmented and separated. So there's no one for them to come together and help them.
Yeah, because
But
the pay isn't going up, but the rent is going up. Like, how is it affordable for us? How are we supposed to, like, now I'm being putting out there. How am I supposed to pay the rent where it's normally 14, now it's 17? Where's the middle ground right now? So then even with we have a voucher, but my voucher's for $1,200. So it's like, I still have to pay. And then it's like, yes, I have Section 8, but I work. So it's not like that there is not like I'm just on here getting a handout. No, I work, I pay my own rent. So it's not as if I'm just not working and they pay the rent. No, I still pay my own rent. I pay for heat. I live in a single family. So I pay my own heat. I pay my own hot water. I pay a water bill. I take care of my lawn. So I still pay for everything. So it's not just like I'm on Section 8 and I don't pay anything. I pay for everything. So basically I take care of myself. So yes, I have Section 8. Yeah, I waited for 8 years. I was on the list for 8 years. And then I finally got it. And basically I'm on it right now just for a crutch, for a case like what happened with COVID. It's a crutch for me right now, but it's not like, you know what I mean? So at the end of the day, something, what I'll say is something for the middle, for the small people. They just need to follow the laws that are already set in place.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. Before we open it up to questions from the audience, I just want to ask one last question for each one of you. Why does this matter, right? Like, why does stable housing matter? If you find some place where you can, put your head down for the night, and you can do that each night, then problem solved, right? Why does it matter that you're in an affordable place, a long-term place? Why is that important to you in your own words? Let's start with you, Ms. Beltry.
Wow, that's a serious question, Jamil, because it brings me back to when I was homeless, living in my car with my boyfriend, who was my abuser at the time. And we would drive around in the cold, in the winter. And I remember December, driving around the neighborhood and looking at people, they had their lights on, they had decorations on or whatever. And I remember thinking, everyone has a right to have a home. And at the end of the day, the short answer is, irrelevant of what someone may be going through, the mess ups they have made, everyone deserves to have a safe, stable home. They should. And yes, I'm not saying that everyone needs to engage in their own progression, but when you have barriers in place and regulations and policies that are working against you, it makes it all the harder. So for me, it's important that everyone be housed because that is a basic need.
Thank you. Ms. Wilson, why is this important to you?
It's important to me because I'd like to have somewhere safe for me and my kids to sleep at night. I mean, out of all the worries that, that you have to deal with, this should be the last thing I have to worry about in day-to-day life. This should be the least thing that me or my children have to deal with out of everything in the world. Like, it's a struggle to even know if I can or they will come home at night from even school. So this should be the least of our worries. And simple answer.
Thank you. And for you, Mr. Kristofowski, why is this important to you?
It's important to me because I don't want to see anyone go through what the three of us have gone through or others have gone through. Housing is a basic human right, not just in this country, but worldwide. And it shouldn't be this hard for people to get affordable housing. I grew up in the 60s in a time where my father had one job and was able to support a family. Everything was reasonable. There was a time people cared about people. And I point to a speech that President Carter made in '76 called his Malaise speech, where he said, we used to be identified as a nation of who we are, and we're becoming identified as a nation of what we have. People put money and value over basic human needs. And it's important to remember that people that are homeless or were homeless are people. They are people like you and me. They're somebody's aunt, uncle, brother, sister, mother, father, whatever. They didn't aspire to be homeless, but to be able to take down the barrier and just offer these people a basic human need, which is stable housing, it shouldn't be that hard to do. We're the richest country in the world. There's no reason why any of us should have to go through this.
Thank you very much. And thank you all for your thoughtful responses and for having the courage to really open up and share these experiences. Because like I said earlier, people treat housing instability like a personal moral failing. So it really is hard for people to talk about these things openly because they feel that they may be ridiculed, they feel that they may be blamed for it. And as you can see through all of your experiences, there is no blame to place on yourselves, whether it's through injury, through greedy landlords, through difficult relationship situations. Like, those are the types of things that people experience and happen in the course of a life, and it should not become a situation where one accident, not even mistake, because these aren't even mistakes that are happening, one accident, one choice leads to years and years and years of difficulty. I think that should be the main takeaway for everyone who's listening today, that these are regular people who had something out of their control happen to them, and the result became years of difficulty. And that seems completely out of whack. It seems completely out of whack in terms of how these people have had to navigate this, but they speak for the experience of so many others who we didn't hear from today, because all of us are just people you might pass on the street, and you can imagine that every single person you're passing on the street might have a story like this, and how unbelievable it is that we can't secure the most basic thing, housing for people, because this is the thing you need the most. You need housing like you need food, like you need air, like you need water. And we should really look at these types of situations and see how we can make it easier for people to navigate. So thank you for sharing your stories, and thank you for opening up to this audience in the way that you have. And I'm going to transition over to some of the questions that we received from the audience. 1 second, let me take a look. So the first question is from Ms. Wilson. The person wrote, Ms. Wilson discussed unsafe living conditions, including black mold. We know unsafe conditions can lead to illness and poor health. This can lead to wide-reaching repercussions. How hard has it been for you to know that you and your children are being exposed to this health risk?
It was very hard. It was hard. It was disturbing. I was very angry. At first I was angry, and then it was just like, I had to deal with it basically. So I after being angry, I was like, okay, what am I going to do? After calling them trying to get them to do it. I called Section 8 and they basically like, it was like I had no resources. It was like they wasn't helping either. And so after I was like, what am I going to do? So I got my family out of here. To a week later, they came and they cut the things out of the wall, and they basically cut the walls out from downstairs. And I'm like, well, this still isn't here. So they came, I made them come back, and it just really hurt my feelings because I thought, like, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to. Why aren't they helping me? Like, I thought, I've had a good rapport with them for all these 5 years. Like, well, for all the time I've been here, I've been good with them. Like, I don't argue with them. There's been no need to. So it hurt my feelings more than anything. And I felt like, why is me and my kids' health being put to risk right now?
And in terms of like, when you're talking about like, because you felt like you had established some sort of relationship because you are an ideal tenant, right?
Yeah.
You've done what has been asked of you, and all you're asking for in return is that they then hold up their side of the situation, their side of the bargain. And that's just the type of thing that just kind of undervalues you as a person. Is that like what you were feeling too?
Right. I felt like they didn't respect me or my kids or me, period. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. The next question from Ms. Beltry. One thing that people noted in the chat is that they're asking who can be held accountable for this, and how do we hold someone accountable for the type of situation, particularly for you, because like you said, you checked off the box and you're trying to be honest about it, and you paid the price of being honest. How do we change that, and how do we hold people accountable for these types of outcomes when honesty leads to a negative outcome for them? Who do we, I don't want to say blame, but who do we talk to get this fixed? What are your thoughts on that?
I honestly believe that the state would need to get involved because it's a state and federal back and forth. The fact is that marijuana, from a whole perspective, is illegal from a federal lens. So it takes work, and state and also housing authorities, I'm not sure how that would work. I don't know what the logistics would be, but the fact of the matter is, it is legal here. And while I'm not using recreationally, I'm a patient and I'm still facing barriers and discrimination based on stigma, based on the fact that it's still a schedule drug. It's against the law. So it's very difficult, because even being on this forum today, if my housing authority knew that I was a patient, they could easily revoke my lease, and I could literally be facing homelessness, and that isn't fair. So it takes people at the federal level and at the state level to have a conversation.
So even now in the situation where you didn't volunteer that information, but it now hangs over your head like a risk that could basically, like, well, if they find out, now I have this problem to solve. So it's kind of like you're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Correct.
I share this information and I may be punished. I don't share this information, I may be punished. So yeah,
My belief is that I was given a voice and I'm going to use it. And as someone who has been through the ringer from a housing perspective, I think it's important to keep talking about it, because that's what having tough conversations is about.
Absolutely. Thank you. A question for you, Mr. Kristofalski. I'm going to kind of combine these two questions together because you mentioned this earlier. You talked about this in your experience, that many people in the chat, several people are acknowledging that there are several recommendations to connect to places like CT Fair Housing and legal aid. How can we work to make those connections easier and more attainable? And another person asked, do they feel that 211 is really taking on these types of problems now? Because you mentioned there were several programs that didn't exist when you started through this. Do you think that there's been improvements in how legal aid and fair housing and 211 are coordinating, or there's something to be more done?
There's definitely been improvements with 211 since I went through what I went through 10 years ago, because now it's part of the coordinated care access, where they have to keep you on the line and find you a placement in a shelter or try to find you stable housing given your situation. Legal aid at the time, I didn't contact them only because I didn't think I was going to need an attorney's intervention, because everything looked like it was black and white in front of me, and me being a thick-headed person figured I could navigate that myself. But in the end, I wound up having to get an attorney. I've seen improvements in 211, but there's always room for improvement with everything. And you know, even though they have gotten better and a lot of money and a lot of, you know, committee time has been put into that where they've gotten better. A few years back, we had the 100 days challenge here in Connecticut, which was to house as many people as you could in 100 days. And all the agencies came together, dropped the red tape, and in 100 days, I believe they housed over 110 people in this state. So it can be done. So there have been improvements, but there's still a lot of red tape and a lot of not being connected to what's going on. A lot of agencies don't speak to each other, and I wish they would. So does that answer your question, I hope?
Yes, thank you very much. Another question for you, Ms. Wilson. Did you feel that you were aware of your rights as a tenant when you moved into your current living space? And if not, do you think that that might have helped to change your situation?
Well, my rights in regards to what? But I mean, I do feel like I was aware of my rights, like if they mean like within the molds or within like my security deposit, things like that, because I reached out to Section 8, I reached out to different things. Like, yeah, I did feel, that's why I called them. Like even now, like with the move out packet, I called and I spoke to them and I asked them like, hey, you guys, you're not supposed to do this. And they provided so much backstory, like, yes, we can, and this, like, I am aware of my rights, but what am I supposed to do? They keep giving me the runaround. They're still charging me, like even with the toilet paper that for the clog, they're like, well, we found a foreign object. What was the foreign object? Because I was standing right there. Well, it was toilet paper. Toilet paper isn't a foreign object. What am I supposed to say? So yeah, I am aware of my rights, but at this point where I have to be out next month, what am I supposed to do?
Right, the immediacy.
And I did, like I said, I did reach out to Section 8. Section 8 told me to go to legal aid. And at the time of the mold, I reached out to Section 8 again. They said, okay, we're going to come and check. By the time that they did schedule the time, because they said they would withhold from paying the rent, by the time that they came, they had already cut out because I sent Section 8 the pictures. I sent Rigo the pictures, which is who I rent from. And they said that they would, if they didn't handle it by the time they came, but they came a month later, by that time, Rigo had already cut out all the mold. So yeah, I am aware of it, but at the most, Section 8 is telling me to go to legal aid. So they're not helping too much either.
Right. Then it becomes that same sort of bureaucratic nightmare that Mr. Christopher.
The runaround, like, oh, well, we can't do nothing. My hands are tied. So.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. A question for, let me see what just came in. Question for you, Ms. Belcher. Kind of what else could have made your experience easier as you were transitioning, especially coming into the state? Because you said you grew up and lived in Massachusetts. So how was it? What was the situation for you when you had to actually learn more about like how things work in Connecticut? And was that a barrier for you as well, navigating our system?
You know what, Jamil? I learned pretty quickly. I'm just that person that hits the floor running. Even if I'm broken, that's just how I am. Like India says, you do what you have to do. So I learned how to navigate Connecticut through the domestic violence agency, through all those advocates that supported me, through people in the community that I got to know. So for me, it wasn't difficult navigating it. What was frustrating was the red tape. What was frustrating is knowing that there are biases and there is a stigma and I'm being stereotyped and I'm being victimized or re-victimized because of things that were out of my control. So it wasn't so much the navigating. I think I did well navigating, even though I wasn't from the state. I think it's what I faced and what came up as I navigated. And to an extent, I felt like to an extent, I felt like Joe, and to an extent, I felt like India, in that you got to a place where you felt like my hands are tied. There's nothing I can do. So when I was at that fake transitional living house, even though it had been investigated by the FBI and the person was in trouble and they were arrested, charges were brought, they're now serving their time, that left me without money that that person should never have gotten. So I didn't have money that I could have used as a down payment for an apartment, but at the same time, I wasn't getting paid enough money. So I think it was a multi-layered event, or history that occurred. It was one thing after another. So one thing compounded, and then the next thing, and then the next thing. So I felt frustrated. I felt like I didn't know where to turn. And I keep saying, had I not had the housing authority that I currently reside in not come through, I don't know what would have happened.
Thank you for that answer. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. Another 211 question. I'll send this one to you, Mr. Christofalski. The question was, with 211 as a clearinghouse navigator for social services and public assistance programs, what do you think is necessary to improve communication and information between 211 and those state agencies responsible for administering these programs?
Updates and communication amongst the agencies, and that information gets sent to 211. I think what happened in my case was there was no one to check these programs that they sent me to. And so I got phone numbers for agencies or organizations that didn't exist anymore. But the constant update, whether I've not done yearly, but maybe every 6 months, to make sure that everyone has the correct information. And that's the problem that I found. A lot of agencies do not talk together. And the state agencies need to communicate, and that needs to be made available, that information, to 211, so that the correct information, the correct programs are being offered and administered. And there also needs to be checkup to make sure that those, once 211 passes it off, that it was followed through, and the end result was a good and positive outcome.
Thank you for that answer. And our final question goes to you, Ms. Wilson. The writer asked, is there a reason you are hesitant to contact legal aid?
I just feel like from past experience, I just feel like I just haven't had much help so far with the runaround and going to Section 8 and going to Rego for help. I just feel defeated. So I guess that's the best answer. I just feel like I haven't had much help now. So I just feel like I'm not going to get any help. So I just feel defeated because nobody's been helping me. So I just feel stuck, and I just feel like nobody's going to do anything. So I guess that's the most honest answer. Nobody's helped me. Nothing has happened so far. They've been getting away with it. They just want to keep the money. They've gotten away with kicking me out. Even when the mold was here, they got away with, not paying for the hotel when they had the mold here, when we had to stay in a hotel. Even when the toilet was flooded, that was for 2 days. So I had to keep calling. I kept calling Section 8, and I'm like, listen, we had to go stay with somebody. And then me staying for 2 days, then for them to send me a bill for $400. And then say because my toilet had a unknown substance or whatever they said it was for toilet paper, I had to go stay with somebody. And it's just like nobody's helping me. So it's like, so I just feel like nobody's gonna help me. So it's just like, I just feel defeated. So that's why I guess I can go try, but I just feel like all my options is exhausted.
It's not expecting much. And given the stories that we've heard today, I can totally understand why you'd feel that way. And I understand why all of you feel that way, that as you've reached out for help, you haven't received what you need. And there's just not an expectation that anyone's going to actually come through for what you need to have done, which is,
and
we
then,
hope.
Sorry to cut you off, Jamil. Sorry to cut you off, Jamil. But I mean, I reached out to, this happened 2 days ago. I called my worker at Section 8 Right as it happened, well, when I got it, when I got the letter from them, I called Rigo. I asked them, I called the maintenance people. I called the man, the person that came and snaked it. He said he can charge whatever he wants. And I'm like, well, okay. Okay. So I asked him, can he give me a printout of exactly what he found? And he said, well, toilet paper. And I'm like, okay. I called my worker. I have not heard back from her. I left her 2 messages and I called Section 8 back again, Imagineers to be exact. So I called my worker's boss, left her 2 messages, haven't heard back from them. So it's been a runaround with everyone. So like I said, I mean, I have been taking the different steps, but it's just like, I just feel defeated.
Well, we hope that this panel can make a difference in your situation and in everyone's situation, and that people can really learn from the experiences of you, Mr. Kristofalski and Ms. Beltry, and hear that there are real people behind these stories, not just numbers and not just statistics, but real people with real lives who want something better than what they're experiencing right now. And we're almost at time now, so I'm going to thank everyone for coming out today. Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Thank you, Mr. Kristofalski. Thank you, Ms. Beltry. Thank you so much for sharing what you shared with us today. Thank you for letting your experiences be heard publicly, and thank you for making sure that everyone can hear this is what people experience when they're talking about housing instability. It's not just poor decisions and poor life choices that lead to this, that people are trying to do their best and they just need a little bit of help to make sure that that gets done. So thank you again for all that. And I'm going to turn it back over to Kylie at the Partnership of Housing Communities, Strong Communities. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamil. And I want to express our gratitude to this incredible panel for sharing their expertise today. Obviously, it isn't easy to talk about experiences that are so personal, but this level of expertise and the knowledge that you're sharing with everybody on the call about your navigation of the system and the way that we leave it frequently to tenants and individuals to navigate that system and the red tape and hurdles you encountered, that expertise is so critical to our ability as a state to move forward in a way where we're actually lifting folks up and ending homelessness and ending housing insecurity. It's an absolutely necessary part of that. And so I'm so grateful to all of you for taking time out of your days, and to Jamil for doing a wonderful job moderating today. I hope that everyone learned something and took something away, and that those of you who are in the policy space with us will continue to engage with folks with lived expertise like those on our panel today, and really be listening and letting that drive our work forward. I also wanted to note that there were several folks who shared their own personal stories and through the Q&A and found connections with the speakers today. And I know there's others who want to reach out and provide services and assistance too. So I wanted to thank all of you for doing that. We at the partnership will be collecting that information and collecting those stories and all of the learning that we did today. And again, making this session available recorded. So if you know someone who could really use listening to this great information, we'll be making it available. The link should be available within the next week. So thank you again to everybody. Thank you to Jamil. Thank you, Ms. Wilson, Ms. Beltry. Thank you, Mr. Chris. I'm not going to mess up your name. Kristofalski, I appreciate it. And thank you again to everybody who joined today. We're so grateful that you spent time with us learning and listening this morning. I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody have a great day.